Hey, my name's ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co. Today we're going to review King Richard. So this is directed by Reinaldo Marcus Green. Time is 2 hours 18, a little bit more of the hour and a half, but there is a lot of biography kind of stuff here, so it goes longer. Actors are Will Smith plays Richard Williams, the father. Aunjanue Ellis plays Oracene Brandy Williams, his wife. Sidney plays Venus Williams. Demi Singleton plays Serena Williams. So the story is of this father who, meets his wife, and they have like several daughters, and she has 3 daughters, and he brings 2 more daughters, I think, to the puzzle. He decides that some of his daughters are going to become tennis stars, and Venus and Serena have some of the most promising skills. So he really starts to really focus in. But the only problem is he lives in Compton, so he has like gangbangers around trying to seduce his daughters, and them beating him up left and right. So he has a real struggle to get him from like Compton to like the next level, right? So there's a real challenge there. And so he's just making a practice with like the worst rackets and used up tennis balls and this worn out tennis court. But they're getting the skills in. Right? So that's kind of the story, and then how they fulfill their dream. So analysis-wise, I thought, when I was ending, I was like, why is it called King Richard? Shouldn't it be called Venus and Serena? But if you really think about it, the kids would have become nothing without their father's determination and passion and plan. You also see this also with the Polgar sisters in chess. The father was very astute at, practicing chess every day with the kids and very disciplined, and they became the top. He bred like the top 3 female chess players of all time, which is totally incredible as well. And here you have King Richard, disciplining and having a plan for his daughters to become the #1 tennis players in the world, which was totally unbelievable at the time and never been done. So a very, cool plan that he puts about. It's also cool in part of the film they show Cinderella, and you're like, why are they showing Cinderella? But back then that's all they had, kind of those simple stories from Disney. And it was all about, not bragging too much. Don't let your ego get to your head, because you want to stay cool and calm, collected, and go game to game to game, and not get too overly bragging, because then you burn out, you get in drugs or in trouble or something. So by staying humble and just playing a good game and encouraging the other players, you can keep rising up the ranks. And at the same time, they have to play against they're breaking a lot of glass ceilings, so to say, because there've never been black girls in the sport. There've never been black girls at the matches, the junior leagues, and then so every layer they're breaking through all these stereotypes of what black girls can do, and they're playing in what used to just be white-only clubs. So they have to tiptoe around that and be subtle until they really break through at the final level, right? Then they can kind of be like, okay, now we're a powerhouse, right? But until then, they kind of have to play their cards just right. So I like the way they kind of set that up is really nice. It's also interesting. The father decides to, when they kind of go from these smaller leagues in Compton area and they go to kind of the bigger leagues where they're training to go to the match and go pro. The father's like, no, I don't want them in matches. I just want them training. I want them going to school. And so he's really pushing them to learn all these school. And then the trainer's like, what are you talking about, dude? We should just go pro now. And the father's like, hold your brakes. We're going to go slow. We're going to get a really good education at the same time. And obviously the coach is probably pissed because he only gets paid if they win, right? So if they're not playing, he's not making any money, right? So then when they finally play, then he gets a huge cut, right? But yeah, it was really smart that he did that. And they didn't have it in the movie, but I think it's Serena Williams. I'm not sure if it's Venus or Serena, but one of them got a degree at the school I went to, Indiana University East, where my dad taught. So that is kind of cool. I mean, my dad told me the story, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why did she go to school here? It's in the middle of nowhere. But they had one of the first online programs. They don't have that in the movie, but that's kind of a nice touch, because the father really kind of kept them play sports, but still get a formal education, so you can fall back on that if the sports doesn't work out, which is the case of many of the professional sports players. You can easily burn out, you sprain a leg or physically injured, and you can't play anymore, and then you can just become a coach or nothing. So a lot of people just kind of fizzle out and they don't become anything. So he was just watching their back. So it's really cool that you see the father kind of holding back, and it's kind of a risky play that he drops them from the junior leagues. So that was kind of an interesting playing out, because no one had ever done that before, and they thought, oh, he's going to screw up his whole kid's opportunity, right? It's also interesting, the beginning of the film, there's like, they're in Compton, so when they play in the tennis courts, these young gangbangers kind of show up, and they want to hit on his daughters, and his daughter's like 14, 15. He's like, dude, back off, man. These are young girls. And, they kind of beat him up once in a while. So it's really kind of a bad situation. But, I mean, he doesn't have any option. He lives in Compton. Where is he going to play with his kids? he probably could have drove them to other courts, but he probably would have run into the same issues. Either they're private courts and he can't get in because has the black kids. So the free courts, they're going to be more city courts, and it's going to be the same issue. So that was kind of an interesting play to see that, and as well as the father almost kind of destroys his whole plan because he's a security guard at night. So one night he gets totally flustered with these gang members. They almost try to kill him. So he's like, I'll just take these guys out. This is just ridiculous. And he's about to take them out, and then he gets a drive-by and kills that kid, so he doesn't have to do it. So he's like, oh, thank God, because he came like that close to throwing out the whole career of his daughters just to get vengeance for this, reckless local gangbanger, right? So I really like that twist in the story. I don't know if that was true, if that was so deadly in the real story of King Richard. He definitely lived in Compton, so it was definitely gangbangers. So I could see gangbangers probably intimidating him somewhat. So that was pretty interesting to see how that played out. It's interesting. The one thing I think I would improve upon is they mentioned really briefly the Ain't I Woman speech by Sojourner Truth, which all African Americans probably know very, very, very well, and probably drilled into them by their parents if their parents have any sense of history and everything, because it's one of the more famous ex-slave speech, one of the first freed women, and she made this really impassionate speech. But I think for me, what I would have done is actually have them read the speech. I know it would have added probably 2 minutes to the film and slowed it down quite a bit. But if you're not African American, you probably don't know that speech at all. If you're Asian, you don't know this speech. You're white, you may not have learned this at school, or you forgot about it. So to read that speech, it's such a kick-ass freaking speech. I mean, it's like when you read Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech and you're just like, man, you just want to cry every time you read it. And this freaking speech is just like blow your socks off kind of thing. So I think I would have added that in and maybe cut back a little bit on the Cinderella story. I mean, the Cinderella kind of more identifies with today's kids, but the Sojourner Truth is just like, it's just such a powerhouse of a speech to kind of scale back. I can understand why they scaled it back, because it's a very long speech, and it's kind of maybe a little distant from today's past because people aren't slaves nowadays. But I mean, there's real slaves in China. If you look at the prison camps they have there, or China, the working conditions for making Apple iPods that everyone uses, those are close to kind of slave conditions, right? And in Africa, they have been on and off with slavery up until the 70s, so it's not that far away if people don't know about it, And in here, it was 1860s in the U.S., and Europe was even earlier. But so for the most part, from the Western ends, understanding slavery has kind of been over. But if you think about a lot of these contracts, say, with like an H-1 visa for someone coming from India, they're locked into a job, they can't leave, they have to kiss the boss's ass, and they're getting paid well, so it's not like slavery, but it is kind of indentured servant in the sense that they can't really leave to another job for 5 or 6 or 7 years until they get their visa go through. So that's kind of horrible, because if they have a horrible boss, it's like 7 years of super painful boss. Kissing, not only have to kiss her ass, but it's like you have to put up with someone really bad because you just need that visa. So it's kind of like, there's some remains of that in today's society that people don't really talk about. I really liked how they shot the tennis court. They shot it kind of, some of it was like classical tennis plays with your back and forth, top down. But they also kind of move it back and forth with a lot of camera action on the court, so you get the real feel of the ball moving back and forth, and how the tennis players have to be really quick on their feet to kind of catch those balls. So I really like that. They really played up the dramatization of playing. I also think they did a really great job with the 2 actresses they chose to play Venus and Serena. I don't know how closely they look like them. I think they probably look pretty close. But the really key thing is how they play tennis, right? Because tennis was the main skill set. Obviously, they have to be actors as well, but they have to be actors that play a kick-ass tennis game. And from what I saw on the screen, it was fairly believable on the skill level that they were going pro. Obviously, they can't get the pro athletes, but these guys were played really well. They'd obviously put in a lot of training, got really good at tennis, and they probably shot a lot of shots and had to toss out shots because like the ball went flying or something or didn't hit right. And you can just splice that together in the editing, post-production, but I think they did a really good job, and it doesn't look like there's too many cuts where they had to really change it up. So that's a really good job and really crucial to tell the story, I think. Now the question is, they kind of ended, I think, after Venus's first big match, and you're like, do you really end it there? Another possibility is you could have ended it when, I don't know if it's Venus or Serena, but one of them got the degree, like I mentioned earlier, IU East, and that would have been kind of a capstone as well. But that was kind of the backup plan. The tennis was the main plan, obviously, and that's where they became the most famous, and they barely used that degree, right? Which is kind of a fallback plan, but it's kind of a cool cornerstone as well, besides just the going pro in tennis. And you also could have had Serena going into the pros as well, and they don't really show that. They kind of show Serena kind of following in the footsteps of Venus, and Venus kind of laying the, you know, so they kind of cut short of that, but it's kind of like, where do you end it? And I think ending on the first match is probably a pretty good place. So yeah, overall, I think it was a really good film. There's very few changes I would make. I would just make that Sigourney speech change. They probably could have cut a little bit out of the tennis play and just put more on that speech, for example. But again, if you tell that whole speech, is kind of, it would drag this film down, and you'd be like, why are you talking about slavery? So it kind of, that's probably why they did it. So it didn't seem so non-modern, but I think it would have made a great connection, especially because the character Will Smith plays, the father, I mean, he's taking them pros in like the early 90s, I guess, maybe 2000s, but I mean, he would have been growing up in the 30s, 20s, very, you know, Jim Crow era, he definitely grew up under, and he talks in the scene of where his father saw him getting beat up by these white people, and then he ran away because during that time it was just unacceptable. And so if his father joined, it would have been even worse probably, but it was just so terrible that you see this story of this poor kid getting beat up while his father runs away. You're like, oh my God, this is just like, how backwards era did we live in? But when you come out of slavery, you know, it's like society moves up by the inch. It doesn't move up like by feet, you know, it just kind of like crawl little by little by little by little. So unfortunately, you know, that's just how that kind of progress is, especially with something obvious like racism. You have other things like, you know, like say Puerto Rican versus Jew rising up the ranks as well. They also had glass ceilings they went through, but because they could kind of slowly fit in with the white Anglo-Saxon culture, it was less of a jump, I think, versus if your skin color is darker and you come from what was considered slaves or, you know, considered Chinese, where it's a very distinct look, those races kind of had a lot more barriers to break through, and you know, they all kind of rose up slowly. I mean, even nowadays you see Chinese discrimination in college where they do so well at the SATs and they set the bar higher artificially for Chinese, which is completely racist, right? So you can see the racism still today. It's just, it's totally backwards, you know, they're trying to like balance out the equation, but it's like, man, if they study, they should get to enter, and it should be a meritocracy, not like based on like, we're going to try to make an evil access versus, you know, like these people don't have the skill set yet. They don't have the skill set, you know, but you know, that's another movie to debate on. But hope you guys like it. I recommend it highly. It's very good. Probably a good collector film as well. If you like, subscribe. You can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.